Now we're going to talk about the most common chord progression found in jazz from its early days, in early jazz through the swing period, the bebop period, all kinds of standard tunes. The most common chord progression found actually in Western music. This is the chord progression called the 2-5-1. You'll hear jazz musicians talking about this chord progression all the time. And today we're going to learn about why they talk about it so much and why it's so important to know and what you can do about practicing it and why jazz musicians say they're practicing their 2-5-1s. This is 2-5-1s in Roman numerals, not in Arabic numerals. So a 2-5-1, this is what they're talking about. Two, 5, 1, in the key of C, for example, the 2 chord would be a D minor 7th chord. The 5 chord is a G7, and the 1 chord is a C major 7. D minor 7 to a G7 to a C major 7. It turns out that this chord progression is used so much in standard tunes. Sometimes you might be in the key of E flat and you see F minor to B flat 7 to E flat major, or in the key of G you see a 2-5-1. In fact, quite frequently in standard tunes you might see a 2-5 or a 2-5-1 happening 65 to 95% of the time in the tune. So it's important to get comfortable with this chord progression so that when you're looking at a tune you've never seen before, you'll recognize these 2-5s and 2-5-1 patterns in various combinations, and you'll have lots of material and knowledge already going into the tune so you can play a successful solo. Let's look at our mode choices on these. I think we've been through this already, that it looks as though we're in the key of C, and we know that on a major chord that's acting like a 1, we're going to use the Ionian mode. And on dominant chords, we really only have one choice at this point, and that would be the Mixolydian mode. And that on the 2 chord, we have our safest choice, and our best choice in this case, which is the Dorian mode. So if I'm trying to come up with something melodic, I know that the C major scale will work through all of these chords, but specifically D Dorian, G Mixolydian, and C Ionian are my best mode choices. D Dorian, G Mixolydian, and C Ionian. D Dorian, G Mixolydian, Ionian. Okay, let's build some 2-5-1s and 2-5s from some different keys. As long as you know your scale of sevenths, or as long as you even know your major scales pretty well, you can build lots of 2-5s. Let's say we want a 2-5-1 in the key of E flat major. Well, we're going to build a minor chord on the 2, which would be F minor, a dominant chord on the 5, which would be B flat dominant, and a major 7th chord on the 1, which is E flat major 7th. Let's go ahead and build a 2-5-1 in a different key. How about in A major? Well, in A major, the 2 chord would be a B chord, and remember, in order for it to be a bona fide 2 chord, it has to be a minor 7th. The 5 chord must be dominant, so that would be E7 in the key of A major. And the 1 chord, of course, is an A major 7th. How about another key? How about a tough one this time? Let's go to the key of F sharp major. Not a lot of jazz tunes in F sharp major, but who knows, you might be in that key temporarily in some other tune. So the 2 chord in F sharp major, well, you go to the 2nd node of F sharp, which would be G sharp, and make it a minor 7th. So G sharp minor 7. The 5 chord in F sharp would be, well, the 5th scale degree of F sharp would be C sharp. So the C sharp dominant 7th. And a 1 chord in the key of F sharp, of course, is F sharp major. On all of these chords, remember the 2 chords, any chord that's functioning like a 2, you can use Dorian. Any chord that's functioning like a 5 or a dominant 7th, you can use Mixolydian. And any chord that's functioning like a 1, you would use Ionian. Here's what those modes sound like. Here's the 2-5-1 in E flat. Here's the 2-5-1 in A. And in F sharp. Okay, 2-5-1, Dorian, Mixolydian, Ionian. Okay, you can also see there a little bit farther down in the examples that 2/5s and 2/5/1s come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes. Let's look at some of those. Now we have what might be called a quick 2/5. A quick 2/5 is when you have the 2 chord going to the 5 chord in the space of one measure. It's called a quick 2/5. A lot of tunes. Moment's Notice by John Coltrane is a great example of a tune with a lot of quick 2/5s. And we can also call something a quick 2/5/1 if we have the 2 to the 5 happening in one measure and then the 1 chord happening for a full measure in the next bar. A lot of tunes, a lot of standard tunes have this kind of a 2/5. It might be called a quick 2/5/1. A slowed down version of the 2/5 is where you might have the 2 chord happening for a full measure and then the 5 chord happening for a full measure. This happens a lot in ballads. It happens a lot in up-tempo tunes. It just means that you have a longer time to experiment harmonically and melodically on each of these chords. But this might just is a 2/5 where each chord is a measure in length. And then we have a longer 2/5/1 where we do resolve to that 1 chord towards the end, and we get that 1 chord usually for 2 measures, although not always. This resembles somewhat the last 4 measures of a blues. It's a slowed down 2/5/1. So those are generally the 4 combinations of 2/5s and 2/5/1s you're going to see that happen quite frequently in all kinds of standard and classic tunes. Let's look at some of the examples now. Here's a D minor to G7 to C major. That's a slow 2/5/1. Okay, slowed down 2/5/1. Or we have a quick 2/5/1. The next example, F minor to B flat 7 to E flat major. Okay, there's a slow 2/5 in the next example in the key of G flat major. And a quick 2/5 in A major, B minor to E7. So let's just think about this. Let's say you master some of these 2/5s. You find some good melodic patterns that work on a quick 2/5 and a quick 2/5/1. A slow 2/5 and a slow 2/5/1, and you master, let's say, 12 melodic phrases each. You can get these phrases by listening to great solos, transcribing some 2/5s and 2/5/1s from great solos. You can actually get a lot of 2/5s and 2/5/1s from classic bebop tunes and classic standard tunes. Let's see. Let's think of an example. Here's an example of a tune by Charlie Parker called Ornithology. And here's a little 2/5, G minor to C7. Would work on this chord progression right here. It sounds like this. That's the 3rd and 4th measures of Ornithology by Charlie Parker. If I just learn that little melodic fragment, okay, that's a slow 2/5. And I play that in a couple of different keys. You can see that I'm getting some material together on 2/5s in different keys. So when I see a tune I've never seen before, and all of a sudden it says G minor to C7 or D minor to G7, a measure apiece, I've got some material ready to go. In fact, that same tune has a 1 phrase that comes after it. That little melody on the F major chord. So if I memorize and practice that 2/5/1 in a bunch of different keys, I'll have some slow 2/5/1s to go through a lot of different tunes. Let's try a different key. How about E flat? How about C major? How about B flat? This is what we call building our craft. When a jazz musician, one of the things they do when they build their craft is go into the practice room and figure some things out. So when they're in the situation of being spontaneous and improvising in a spontaneous kind of environment, they've always got something ready to go. They've got some bag of tricks ready to go to if the inspiration just isn't there, or if they need some other pathway to go down. Quick 2/5 here. That's an example of a quick 2-5. We could do that little pattern in a couple. It's the example right there, B minor to E7. We could practice that in different keys. All I'm doing is playing that same pattern in a bunch of different keys so that I get the feeling and the craft together of these 2-5s. Let's look at some of the 2-5s that are given to you at the end of this unit. Go ahead and play them for you. Here's a slow 2-5 one is first. Yeah, nice little bebop 2-5. You can do that in some different keys. You find that most of the good 2-5s actually have a lot of good chord tones in there. Look at that first D minor chord, arpeggiating right up the D minor 7th chord and coming down 2-1. The G7 starts on the 4th scale degree but resolves to the 3rd. And the C major chord just arpeggiates up and down the C major. How about just a slow 2-5-1, F minor to B flat 7. Okay, arpeggiating up and down the F minor 7th chord. And then a little 4-3 resolution on the B flat. How about A minor to D7? That's a slow 2-5. Okay, just the 5th to the 3rd, the 3rd to the root, and the 5th to the 3rd of the dominant in different keys. Okay, you can see if I had a tune with a bunch of changes and I had these little 2-5s worked out, I'd have a lot of material ready to go. How about the quick 2-5 there, C minor to F7 to B flat major. Okay, down the C minor 7th, up to the 3rd of the F7, and work your way down to the 3rd of the B flat. Okay, got a lot of stuff together in different keys just by practicing it. There's another quick 2-5. Actually, it looks like most of them are pretty much the same from here on out. Let's create some of our own 2-5s now. Let's see, there's some given to you there. Let's build one of the quicker ones, B flat minor to E flat 7. Let's look at that one. And we know on the B flat minor chord, we're going to use Dorian. The E flat 7, we're going to use Mixolydian. And the A flat major, actually we're just building a 2-5. So the B flat minor we're using Dorian, and the E flat 7 we're using Mixolydian. All those notes come from the A flat major scale. That's why I'm putting the key signature of A flat here. Okay, remember, try to be, just like we talked about when we were building those good rhythms, about half the time on the beat, half the time in between the beats, using chord tones on strong beats and passing tones in between the beats. I don't know, I think I'll just start on the root of the chord and I'll just go right up. Maybe I'll come down the triad. Okay. Go up to the root of the E flat. Remember, I'm trying to, in general, keep chord tones on strong beats. B flat, D flat, F, B flat, E flat, E flat. Here I'm using a little 6-5 resolution there. Here's what this one sounds like. Right, so if I had that and did it in a few different keys, practice that in different keys and around different chord progressions, I'd have a lot of material to go. Let's do a quick 2-5-1. How about the one that's A minor to D7 to G major? A minor to D7 to G major. That's a quick 2-5 in the key of G. Sometimes jazz musicians that are just getting started attempt to be a little bit too overly creative. You know, there's a lot of material that's already given to you. This is already a successful chord progression. It already sounds really good. We already know that the chord tones are going to sound really good. We know that the scale degrees in between, the Dorian, the Mixolydian, and Ionian, are going to sound really good. But sometimes people try to get overly creative with fancy rhythms or starting on unusual chord tones. You'll find that a lot of the best musicians who play through changes really well, Clifford Brown, Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, Fats Navarro, Dizzy Gillespie, to name only a few, really when you break down what they're doing, they're actually playing some things that are generally pretty simple and easy to figure out on these chords. So don't try to be overly creative. Start by doing some things that are simple and make sure it's something that you can work through some different keys. On this one, maybe I'll just start on the 7th of the chord and work my way down the minor 7th. At that point, why don't I go straight to the root of the D7 and go 1, 2, 3, 5. That always is a nice little pattern. 1, 2, 3, 5 again on the G major. How about that? Yeah, that's actually enough right there. That's probably going to sound pretty good. Arpeggiate the A minor 7th, 1, 2, 3, 5 on the D7, and 1, 2, 3, 5 on the G major. Make sure I get my half rest at the end there. So that sounds something like this. And do that in some different keys. And then I could take some other ones and mix them and match them. But sometimes what you might do when you really get into this, you could have, say, 12 or so of each of these and number them 1 through 12, and then find a tune that's got a lot of 2/5s in it. Quick 2/5s, there's a very difficult and interesting tune called Lazy Bird you can try, or another one by John Coltrane called Moment's Notice. For some longer 2/5s, there's a great tune by Miles Davis called Tune Up. And you can take these tunes and practice your 2/5s on them in different keys. How about one that's a couple of quick 2/5s back to back? Let's do something like C minor 7 to F7, and then A minor to D7. You can find that you can do one thing quickly and then go and do the same thing quickly in the next couple of measures. Here I started on the 3rd of the C minor, made my way down the Dorian mode, keeping the C, the E flat and the C on the beat, and then A and the F, 2 chord tones of F dominant 7th there. Do the same thing on the A minor. Okay, let's hear what that one sounds like. There we go, C minor to F7. You can try that little quick 2/5 in a lot of keys. Yeah, I've got to practice it myself, but that's a nice one to work through. So that's the idea of 2/5-1s. A minor 7th followed by a dominant followed by a major, all separated by a 4th. Many times you'll see the 2/5 just as itself as a pair, but many times you'll see a 2/5-1 happening all together. We've got quick 2/5s, which is 2 beats apiece, a quick 2/5-1, which is 2 measures. We've got a slow 2/5, which is a measure of 2 and a measure of 5. And we've got a slow 2/5-1, 4 measures to get through the whole phrase. Spot these out in your tunes, and you'll start seeing that if you can spot a 2/5-1, you've found the key of the tune, or at least a temporary key of the tune. Practicing 2/5s can't be emphasized enough. It's an important part of developing skill and developing craft as a jazz musician, playing through changes and playing through standard and classic jazz tunes.